One bustling day amidst a lively street, students were celebrating something in a bar. Thus, they were marking the end of their academic semester. But among them was a gloomy boy named Jae-sung. Recently, it turned out he had received poor grades, which was unusual for him. However, what irritated him the most was being compared to Hyun, who seemed to be on a completely different level. People loved Hyun because he was an angel who cared for his classmates. Ji-sun realized that he had lost his standing that day. He had never felt lower, and all because that person had returned. Yoon Jae-sung had always been a paragon, possessing beauty, wealth, and talent. Yet now, such a person had been relegated to second place. Last year, Hyun wasn't even here. Because of this, the hero didn't even look at him, let alone the group. The waiter who brought the drinks politely hoped they would have fun. It turned out to be the very same Hyun everyone was fervently discussing. Everyone except Yoon Jae-sung was naturally happy to see him. Hyun admitted that he was working here and in 5 other places besides. Feeling the piercing gaze upon him, the hero pondered where he had gone wrong. Other students invited him to join their table, but he politely declined. Suddenly, one of the attendees decided to finally introduce himself. It was Yoon Jae-sung from the business faculty. With a radiant smile, he assured that he had lowered his rank through his efforts. Since he was younger, there was no need to speak formally with him. One of the students explained to the hero that he just needed to accept it. Jae-sung was, after all, somewhat of a perfectionist. He was a bit upset because he failed to take the top spot in the exams this time, but there was no time to continue the conversation, as the boy was at work. Therefore, he had to go. But before that, he turned to the aggrieved student. With a sincere smile, Hyun assured him that he was confident he would succeed next semester. However, the hero took this as mockery. Late at night, the boy finally returned home. The day's events kept replaying in his mind. In the end, it wasn't that important, and it was unlikely to be about the scholarship. But today's matters weren't over yet. Because the exams had lasted so long, he had forgotten something. After all, he hadn't logged in for quite some time. Plugging in his laptop, the boy immediately started the live stream. Many people quickly joined the stream, as he usually did things on camera that people didn't show in public. While the streamer was busy, the chat was curious about who would donate the most this time. After some time, Hyun saw a new username on his stream. JS. It was the son of a wealthy family, with a luxurious mane and incredible beauty. All problems seemed to bypass him, allowing him to live peacefully, at least until recently. He had tried everything to restore his manhood. He had even desperately resorted to all sorts of folk remedies and many other things. The doctor who examined him noted that he was young, and according to the tests, no abnormalities were found, suggesting that the cause was likely psychological. Therefore, he was prescribed medication to take every hour. But the patient was, of course, dissatisfied with the result, and in desperation he demanded a cure. Eventually, the boy started drinking, for nothing seemed to help him. Jae-sung decided to share his problems with a friend, who, being a good friend, began to laugh heartily. In the end, he was simply told to worry less and avoid any stressful situations. But his friend Tavun did not quite understand what stress could be bothering their Jae-sung, as it was entirely unlike him. Although, after some thought, he assumed it was because of that second place. This indeed enraged the student, making him ready for a fight. Instead, the boy asked if he had seen the new app. Someone was streaming there, engaging in indecencies on camera, and had recently become quite popular. Considering that the hero hadn't had a girlfriend for a long time, the friend recommended he try something new since he had nothing to lose. The link was already with him, and he just needed to try watching at home and relax. Returning home, Jae-sung decided to take the risk, though he knew it wasn't the same as being with a girl. As soon as he turned on the stream, the sick student was stunned with amazement. He didn't understand how it happened, but it actually looked quite good. Meanwhile, on the other side of the screen after a while, the boy ended the stream and sighed heavily. He knew he was supposed to earn money for this, but today, someone was so generous that he even felt a little embarrassed. The next evening, he and his friend were hanging out at the bar again, and the friend suggested bringing along an acquaintance, to which he was refused. When asked why, Jae-sung didn't answer clearly, but angrily suggested doing it another time. In the end, there was only one question in his mind: how he, the 24-year-old Yoon Jae-sung, had become impotent. There was a popular app for a special community called Cake. You could only register by invitation from another member, and each member was responsible for the person they invited. Here, people shared information, communicated with each other, and sought one-night partners. But the most popular content on the app was anonymous streamers engaging in indecencies on camera. Viewing and commenting were free, but if you donated a large amount, according to the site's rules, the streamer had to fulfill one request of the donor. The maximum donation amount per day was 1 million stars, also called the Golden Bell. Now, Hyun was puzzled by receiving that million all at once. He considered that viewer to be odd for donating such a large sum to a stranger. But now he just had to fulfill any of his wishes. Turning the stream back on, he apologized for the sudden disconnection and explained that the internet had cut out. When asked what he desired, the viewer, with the initials JS, simply placed a question mark, as if not understanding the situation. Thus, it was explained that if someone donated a large sum of money, the streamer had to fulfill one wish, within reason. But as it turned out, the wealthy viewer wasn't interested in this and allowed the streamer to do as he pleased. This suddenness somewhat irritated the student, so he asked the viewer to choose a number between 1 and 5. The number 1 came up, causing the streamer to tremble slightly, as he rarely did this, but the viewers liked it nonetheless. Meanwhile, the same donor, watching this, began to understand that his hormones were raging, and he didn't comprehend how he had stooped to watching this. For a moment, he even considered going back to the doctor, though everything seemed fine now. But in any case, no one should ever know about this under any circumstances. However, it was different from other videos of this type, and the content itself was not very arousing. Yet, for some reason, it still helped with the problem, and he accidentally ended up donating. Remembering his friend's words about popularity, he reluctantly agreed that this streamer had earned his popularity for a reason. Still, it wasn't a large sum for him, so he decided it would be a gratitude for solving this delicate issue. He had to wait for what seemed like an eternity, and at one point, it seemed he would die with this problem. Calling a familiar girl, Jae-sung asked her for a meeting. As strange sounds were distracting him, he had to turn off the stream. However, once they were alone, the acquaintance said she was expecting something different. But for some reason, his little friend was too limp, and she hoped it wasn't her fault. The boy himself didn't understand what was happening and how it could have happened again. Returning home, the sick boy turned on the stream again, and his friend rose from the dead once more. But this trend did not satisfy Jae-sung at all. When the girl realized that nothing would come of it, she decided to leave and not waste time. She also declared that he shouldn't even call her until all his problems were resolved, and he shouldn't spread rumors that she rejected him, for then everyone would know about his terrible problem. The hero believed that everything would finally be fine, but harsh reality brought him back to his senses, and now he feared the worst possibility, that he could only function around that streamer. That same night, Jae-sung called his friend, immediately inquiring if he knew this streamer. He was asking about the very one recently recommended to him. Any information was crucial. The boy seized the opportunity, demanding sweets for information, much to Jae-sung's displeasure. They bought all the sweets at a local pastry shop. To their surprise, the familiar boy was selling there, who wasn't too pleased to see them. Jae-sung, wasting no time, decided to mock the one who had taken first place from him and lowered his self-esteem. As not everyone knew each other, the boy introduced himself as Hyun, from the same faculty. The new acquaintance immediately recognized him as the one who dethroned their Jae-sung and wished to thank him. Hyun felt some discomfort around him, but he seemed like a good person. They were offered to take any available table and their order would soon be brought. The hero assumed the seller wanted to get rid of them quickly or that his shift was ending. But as he thanked him, Jae-sung fell into a sudden stupor. It seemed he had heard this voice somewhere before, or perhaps it was just his imagination. Eventually, the questioning began, and the freeloader explained he didn't know where the streamer was from, but looked a bit over 20. Some people speculated he was a student, as his streaming breaks coincided with university exam dates. Jae-sung understood perfectly that the streamer had indeed helped him and needed to find him. Meanwhile, Hyun finished his shift and went to the changing room to get dressed. He also couldn't fathom why he was increasingly encountering Jae-sung lately. It became clear that someone else taking first place meant more to him than it seemed. Suddenly, his phone buzzed with new messages. These were notifications from the site where he received donations and strange proposals. Tired of it all, he temporarily disconnected. Scrolling through the donor names, he stumbled upon the golden bell who had sent a new message. The student wouldn't have been surprised if it said something like, "Take care of yourself." However, it turned out the person was asking for a meeting, assuring he would pay whatever it took. Without much thought, the streamer blocked the viewer, believing they were all the same and that he wasn't doing it for money. Once, he had to meet a couple of such fans, and they all turned out to be perverts. It wasn't strange, but he just wanted to befriend someone without hiding his orientation. Suddenly, a sleepy person named Sivu, his employer, entered the room. The man immediately praised the worker for being so diligent. He responded that after the semester ended, he had more free time and decided to come in and leave earlier. Lighting a cigarette, Sivu pondered the need to attend some college. The phone kept buzzing with notifications from the same app, unsettling the boy. But the employer seemed to see through him and asked if anything was bothering him lately. Hyun, of course, couldn't explain his concerns and assured nothing was wrong, and he would always speak up if something was. While they continued talking, Jae-sung was still in the pastry shop and saw them. Observing from the side, The sick student assumed they had a good relationship. It was unclear if they were colleagues, or if Sivu was his boss, or if they were indeed so close. Late at night, Lee Hen barely dragged himself home, nearly dying of exhaustion. 3 shifts a day were too much even for him. With trembling hands, he checked the cafe bill on his phone. Reflecting on it, he mentally addressed his grandmother, noting that he seemed to really enjoy life. As a child, he had to live with his grandmother, and he often delighted her with his achievements. She was very proud of him, constantly assuring him that he was nothing like her. When asked what he wanted to eat, the child happily replied he wouldn't mind some chicken with his grandmother. She often assured him that he would become smart and wealthy in the future and could afford any food and clothes. Although times were tough, she believed that one day they would be fine, and he needed to study hard for it. Grandmother always knew how to choose the right words to convey her thoughts. Even now, he couldn't indulge in nostalgia due to constant app notifications. But as soon as he looked, he was deeply shocked. Maximum donations of 1,000,000 stars kept coming. The streamer even considered calling the police about it. Ultimately, he decided to turn off notifications and relax for at least a few days. He wasn't going to respond, just because someone had become more persistent. Several weeks passed, and it became clear that he was overly optimistic. The massive donations continued, and it was clear that the person with the username JS had definitely lost his mind. This money was a burden. It was unclear whether to accept it and what he would have to do for it. Finally, Lee Hen gave in and decided to unblock the desperate viewer and ask what he truly wanted. Meanwhile, Yoon Jae-sung was relaxing in his way. Upon receiving the message, he quickly explained that rereading his messages made him realize he looked like a real pervert. The sick student knew he needed to convince him quickly that everything was fine, so he wouldn't block him again. For this reason, the wealthy viewer confessed he regretted contacting him and had gone to the hospital because of him. He did it only because of him, if that made sense. And though it might be strange if the streamer didn't have a partner, they could meet for one night. He truly had no partner, but he wasn't going to fall for it easily and asked if there was any reason not to refuse now. At that moment, JS decided he could seduce the desired streamer and assured him he was genuinely hot, offering to prove it practically. Suddenly, he sent his nude photo, which Lee Hen hadn't expected to see. Shocked, the boy fell onto the bed, unsure of what to do next. Nevertheless, JS was very persistent, making the student ponder. The next day, the admirer kept sending messages regardless of his busy schedule. Both sides were eager to know what their favorites were up to. It became clear how strange the app was, with odd people and peculiar dialogues. It wouldn't have been surprising if he felt uncomfortable or bored, but instead, he enjoyed the conversation, feeling like they had known each other for a long time. Maybe it was because he didn't have to hide his orientation for the first time, or because he was sincere in their dialogues. In any case, he eagerly awaited something more and thought maybe JS wasn't so bad. So, at one point, Lee Hen began hoping they would become more than friends. Meanwhile, at Jae-sung's home, as soon as he heard a message notification, he would drop everything and rush to it. He hadn't expected to receive a message so quickly. But suddenly, he realized the streamer had probably been flirting with him the past few days. The conversation partner was no longer as busy as before, and he was glad they could talk. But it was all for one night. Just as he wondered if these talks were necessary, the long-awaited message arrived. The next day, Lee Hen arrived at the meeting place but saw no one, wondering if he was too early. He hoped everything would go well. After all, they were just meeting, and if it wasn't some weirdo, maybe they'd meet again. He never thought he would meet someone like this, having no friends except Sivu. Since school, his peers didn't like him because he was an orphan. As he grew up, the bullying didn't stop. It seemed people were just waiting for an opportunity. Despite his academic efforts, people refused to accept him, believing he was poor and took money from taxes. This had been the case for a long time, and Lee Hen thought everything would be fine, but it wasn't, and he feared dealing with strangers. Now, it wasn't clear how he could hope everything would be okay. He constantly worried that his new friend might hate him, or worse, be like everyone else. Meanwhile, Jae-sung realized how late he was, all because of Tavoon. He was always busy and didn't hang out with his friend, who became clingy when ignored. It was hard to believe he could be late for such a long-awaited first meeting. While searching for the right person, the student suddenly came across a familiar face. Seeing him, it became increasingly clear that Lee Hen fit the description. Jae-sung couldn't believe it and tried hard to convince himself it couldn't be true. At that moment, he panicked, realizing he had been planning and fantasizing about someone so familiar who seemed decent. Nevertheless, he was clearly not in the best state. From his trembling, it was clear that something was wrong and that he might not be feeling well. Ultimately, it was decided to approach him and inquire what had happened and why he was sitting like that. Suddenly, Lee Hen embraced Jae-sung, mistaking him for Sivu. The hero, hearing this name, realized he did not know this person, yet his arms instinctively embraced him in return. What was even stranger was how this situation interested him. Lee Hyun eventually realized his mistake and apologized, explaining he had confused him with an acquaintance. Only a moment later, it became clear that the person before him was Yoon Jae-sung. Jae-sung was slightly annoyed that his clothes were soiled with someone else's tears. Still trembling, the streamer assured him that he was fine and was ready to cover the cost of dry cleaning. However, it turned out that Jae-sung didn't care since he could afford new clothes every day. Despite his cheerful demeanor, his classmate remained in a rather poor state. For this reason, Jae-sung gently took the boy in his arms, asking if he was sure everything was all right, as he was visibly sweating. Such proximity made the boy uncomfortable, so he had to step back, assuring him everything was fine. Lee Hyun truly didn't understand what was happening. Surprisingly, he felt at ease. Earlier, there was tension between them, but now it seemed as if he had gotten used to his presence. In a moment, he finally remembered that this was a date, and he had been so distracted that it had slipped his mind. He apologized to Jae-sung, explaining that he had an appointment and needed to hurry. The wealthy donor, with a slight smile, noted that it was all right, as he was also in a hurry. Suddenly, grabbing Lee Hyun's hand, he pulled him along. There were many people around, so they needed a quiet place. At that moment, their friends were watching them intently. Upon arriving at a quiet spot, the streamer asked what was going on, as he really needed to go. In response, the acquaintance came closer, declaring that he wasn't even listening to him. Observing him more closely, he increasingly resembled the streamer. With the same mysterious smile, Jae-sung drew even closer, saying this was madness, as Hyun didn't resemble him at all. Everything was whispered so that no eavesdroppers could hear them, and the hero noted that his acquaintance was doing his job well. No one knew about it, and if people figured it out, Hyun would likely end up alone, as this was unlike his usual behavior. The boy kept insisting that he didn't understand what was being said, and such behavior was too much. The hero decided to enlighten him by saying words often heard in streams, specifically thanking him for the donations. He was now certain that Hyun was the mysterious streamer. Without much thought, the young student broke free from his acquaintance's grip, denying everything said to him. He wanted to convince Jae-sung that he had mistaken him for someone else. He never expected this person to discover his secret. This could mean he had been on the app, but even if true, how did he manage to find him among so many streamers? Skipping countless people, the one who exposed him was from the same university and group, Yoon Jae-sung. It couldn't be a coincidence, but in any case, he intended to insist on his innocence. However, the hero already had a plan and took out his phone. Shortly, Hyun received a donation notification on his phone. Now it was futile to deny everything. Suddenly, the streamer angrily accused the viewer of donating so much just to spend a night with him. Jae-sung, in turn, accused his acquaintance of being unreasonable by blocking someone who had sent him so much money. Indeed, being such a streamer was genuinely strange. Hyun was no less astute, declaring that a pervert who watches such streams is no better than him. Eventually, the commotion drew the attention of others. But in the end, both were exhausted from the mutual insults. The streamer realized he needed to leave quickly, never imagining his secret would be revealed, as this activity simply helped him cope with stress. From his perspective, being carefree was pure madness, and he never expected to see Jae-sung here. At that moment, images from the past resurfaced, and he convinced himself everything would be as before. Therefore, he decided to inquire about the reason for the meeting and whether it was for blackmail. The hero stated the obvious. If he did that, he would implicate himself first, not wanting people to know he was a pervert who enjoyed watching such streams. And somehow, it seemed that Lee Hyun would also not be pleased if others found out. For this reason, the hero now proposed that the streamer spend the night with him as a deal. After a while, they managed to be alone, and Hyun felt as if the same thing was happening repeatedly. They all wanted only one thing. It was unclear if it would be different now, but if nothing ever changed, it should end as usual. Now, in close proximity, Jae-sung suddenly asked the boy to do what he had done on the stream. Without much thought, the wealthy viewer was hit with a pillow and called a pervert. Most importantly, such a thing was suggested to him with an innocent face. In response, the hero began to recall that he had already gone to the doctor, and it made no sense. But after seeing that stream, he decided to write, as it truly helped. That's why Jae-sung was now asking for this favor. If something was needed, he should just say. And he would help, but he needed to check if this would help him. Seeing the thoughtful expression, the hero realized he could insist on his request and started probing deeper, asking what he truly desired. But his wish turned out to be finding a lover. In response, the sick boy laughed heartily. It was quite an obvious answer, yet he hadn't expected to hear it. The hero considered that for such a streamer, at best, he would be a partner or a dominant. However, if it was really that important, he was willing to do it for him. If he needed to find a lover, Jae-sung was ready to behave like one, and was generally ready to help with anything that would assist him. After all, it was he who needed Lee Hen now, and as long as his help was needed, he would do everything in his power. Therefore, it would be the right decision now to close his eyes and make a deal that neither would regret. The next morning, Lee Hen began to realize the enormity of his mistake. On one hand, it shouldn't have happened, but on the other, he behaved very impulsively for some reason. And now, his partner, with a gentle smile, asked if he could repeat it. However, the streamer had no intention of agreeing. After all, he didn't know how many times a day people engaged in such activities, and it was hard to believe that he enjoyed it. In any case, it was time for him to leave. To which the hero still gently asked if they would meet again. It had been a long time since Jae-sung felt so free, and they truly lost nothing from it. Only he wasn't sure of his partner's genuine intentions, though he had previously felt uncomfortable around him. Everything seemed different now. Jae-sung's tenderness was suspiciously overwhelming, and it would be better not to show up in front of him and perhaps pretend nothing had happened. Nevertheless, the hero continued to assure him that he enjoyed spending time together. And if it came to that, they could enter into a relationship without any obligations. At this moment, Jae-sung, full of self-esteem, began to assert that there was no one cooler than him, as he was not only handsome, but also wealthy. Lee Hen had a different opinion, which he intended to express, and he did so in a rather harsh manner, stating that such indecent things shouldn't be spoken of so casually. Gathering himself, slightly embarrassed, he declared that nothing had happened between them. He was genuinely surprised to see those muscles, which is why he suggested trying out sports. But Jae-sung was currently unable to respond, nor understand that he was being addressed. Returning home, the boy realized the feelings were noticeably different from those he had during the streams. Now he was even a bit ashamed of that slap, but in any case, the proposal had been too unexpected. Nevertheless, there was nothing shameful about a one-night stand between adults, as such things happened quite often. A week passed, and the student, as usual, attended to household chores. But he felt completely different from usual. It seemed he was going mad, and he had never had such desires before. The only person who appeared in his dreams was his deceased grandmother, and the pillow was always wet with tears. Yet for some reason he liked it, especially at that age. The past week somehow he woke up with soaked underwear. All week he had dreams he had never had before. And in the morning, Lee Hen woke up feeling entirely different from before. He thought it was a good idea to sort out his thoughts once and for all. But lately, the surrounding world had been getting on his nerves. Perhaps the blame lay on the lack of release, as he hadn't streamed since he started talking with Jae-sung. Eventually, he couldn't stand it and turned on the stream, nearly calling out Jae-sung's name. This didn't give him peace, and Lee Hen considered writing first. But he didn't even know how people usually behave in such situations. Reflecting on how their meeting ended, it became evident that he should be angry with his partner. In any case, he had shown no activity during the stream, so it wouldn't hurt to be the first to reach out. After all, he had no other means of contact besides this app. Meanwhile, Jae-sung was at a meeting with Tae-woon. It turned out his friend had brought someone else along, who was clearly not thrilled about it. The reason for the boy's clinginess was that Savu was the lead vocalist and composer of his favorite band. Nevertheless, it didn't bother him much. And in fact, he wanted to ask Jae-sung what they had done that day, since his friend had been acting strange for a week. The man admitted he had been like an older brother to the boy and hadn't seen him in such a state since childhood. For this reason, Sivu couldn't understand how he had raised such a vulnerable and sickly child. Jae-sung had no intention of dealing with this and simply noted that if the concern was genuine, it would be best to wait until Hen spoke up himself. At that moment, he recalled their meeting that day, wondering whom his partner had called, only to find it was the owner of the establishment where Hen worked. The boy had been very harsh back then, but it seemed he had been worried about it all along. This evoked an unconscious laugh from him. Suddenly, Tae-woon remarked that they had recently worked together, and his face had been swollen a few days ago. At this moment, Sivu, who had been silent for some time, asked if they had spent the night together. Meeting their gazes, Lee Hen couldn't believe he had landed in such a terrible situation. Soon after, the boy locked himself in the staff room with Jae-sung. When asked what happened, he began to apologize, assuring him he was simply surprised. It turned out he was very embarrassed to hear others talk about how they had spent time together. In response, his partner inquired if it was normal to sleep with him, and whether he would deny what happened. At that moment, Lee Hen recalled the old days when Sivu protected him. Despite his wounds, the man assured him it didn't hurt, and even if they had the privilege of growing up with parents, they had no right to bully those less fortunate. Therefore, it wasn't worth dwelling on it, as everything would eventually work out. For this reason, the boy decided to apologize to his partner for what happened last time. And as for the relationship without obligations, he was ready to consider it. Jae-sung, in response, reminded him of Sivu and asked if they could keep it a secret from him. In truth, he didn't want to hear about Sivu anymore, but his curiosity about who he was to him wouldn't let him rest. Could that Sivu evoke the same emotions from the boy? In any case, he enjoyed hearing how Lee Hen went crazy for him. At that moment, Jason silently kissed his partner. However, he didn't intend to stop there, and despite being expected in the hall, he wanted to risk everything now. But it didn't last long, and at one point, Sivu knocked on the door, asking if Hen was there. Sivu received no response, so he decided no one was there. However, his partner quietly remarked that it seemed he was indeed there. The friends left in the hall wondered why the door was locked, but the clingy one desired all the idol's attention and wished to distract him. Eventually, after everything was done, Lee Hen was deeply disheartened, unable to believe he had done such a thing at work. But Jason reminded him that he had to think about it. He understood that it would be good if they were just such evenings, as dating was a bit exhausting. Suddenly, he realized the semester would start soon, and maybe it was a chance to improve his grades. Therefore, he decided to gently and softly declare that he liked him and wanted to date him. However, Jason had not expected such a reaction. Nonetheless, he decided to leave his number and ask not to block him, otherwise he would have to donate twice as much. With that, they parted ways, but not before the wealthy student assured him he hoped he would be the first to reach out this time.